Hey, well met, travelers. Thanks for stopping by my channel. My name's Bob of the Old Ways. If you're new here, welcome. If you're not new here, welcome back. Today, I'm going to re-enter my low-effort content arc and try to get back into some more fandom-related news. And today, I'm looking at a story that kind of flared up over the weekend among the pack-led channels, as I like to call them, the right-wing section of the fandom space. It's a story about Disney apparently replacing a trans character with a Christian character. I'm not sure that's entirely what the story is, but we're going to take a look at an article from a reliable source, and then we'll talk about it as we go along, and maybe I'll have some concluding thoughts afterwards. So without further ado, let's get into this story. So here's one of many articles available online about this story. I'm using Pink News, a website that covers news related to the LGBTQ plus community, because I figured they have the best point of view on this, because the story concerns a potential act of discrimination against trans people. And the sources I like to go to find out what to think about this, or at least to center my thinking around, are the sources from communities who are affected by these decisions directly. And also, this is a perspective that doesn't get represented in a lot of the content that you will probably find springing up on YouTube about this right now. So anyway, this article by Marcus Ratton is titled, "Disney Introduces Christian Character to Win or Lose Months After Axing a Transgender Plot." And the article goes as follows. Disney Pixar's new animated softball series Win or Lose has introduced an explicitly Christian character, the entertainment giant's first in almost 20 years, months after confirming a trans plotline had been axed. I wonder if they count the Chronicles of Narnia movies that Disney put out. That was in like 2005 to 2008, I think. Anyway, not germane really, but I'm wondering what their definition of explicitly Christian is. Anyway, the first episode of the new show saw viewers introduced to Lori, the right fielder for the Pickles softball team and daughter of the team's coach, Dan. Clearly struggling with insecurities around her softball abilities and anxious to impress her father, Lori turns to a higher power to ask for support. "Dear Heavenly Father, please give me strength," she says, clutching her hands in a clenched fist prayer. There's also an angel cutout in Lori's bedroom depicting her faith. The introduction of an explicitly Christian character is fairly innocuous on its own standing, but the context surrounding the show and Disney at large has left some LGBTQ plus TV lovers a little uneasy. So let's take a pause right there. I'm glad this article points out that the introduction of a Christian character is fairly innocuous on its own. It's not really that big of a deal, right? And based on the context of what we just read, I think that this character was not added to the show. She's the daughter of the coach of the team. So she's kind of a main character. And it's unclear to me whether the Christian element was added afterwards. I suspect what actually happened is that both the Christian character and the trans character were part of the cast from the very beginning, and Disney just kind of got scared and cut out the trans elements after online outrage. But the plan was always to have a Christian character and a trans character and some other characters all interacting, because, that's how diversity works. DEI includes representation for Christians too. Anyway, let's read on. In December, Disney confirmed to The Hollywood Reporter that Win or Lose was originally set to feature a young character seemingly struggling with her gender identity, but the dialogue was cut. So I remember briefly about this story that Disney claims it was just a few lines of dialogue, not an entire plot line that was cut out. That doesn't make it okay in my book, but it's a different claim than saying that a transgender plot was axed. Some dialogue about a character identifying as trans, while important, and I would argue necessary, is not the same thing as saying that's their entire plot. You can have a plot with a trans character that does not revolve around that character being trans. It can just be an innocuous insertion into the story, much like this Christian character is apparently supposed to be. Anyway, there's a quote here. Quote, "When it comes to animated content for a younger audience, we recognize that many parents would prefer to discuss certain subjects with their children on their own terms and timeline," a Disney spokesperson said at the time. Okay, so that was their official statement. So what they're saying is they freaked out, basically. There are a group of parents out there who think that being trans is something that kids are groomed into, or that it's like a phase that they're going through, or that it's something they can be talked out of, all of which is objectively wrong. And Disney just kind of bent the knee to those people's fake outrage or misplaced outrage, but probably both in some cases. Anyway, the character in question, Kai, played by 18-year-old trans actress Chanel Stewart, apologies if I'm mispronouncing that name, remains in the series, but with no reference to being trans. At the time, Stewart voiced being, quote, "very disheartened," unquote, that the plot had been nixed, as she, quote, "wanted to make this for transgender kids like me." Yes, because transgender children are real. The world failed them. They did not fail us. Quote, "From the moment I got the script, I was excited to share my journey to help empower other trans youth. I knew this would be a very important conversation. Trans stories matter, and they deserve to be heard," she said. A petition to reinstate the character garnered thousands of signatures, but no luck. Now, while Laurie's Christian beliefs are not depicted as being anti-trans, and Christian characters are not incongruous with trans characters, of course, someone can be both religious and transgender, some viewers feel that the two conjunctive decisions are indicative of Disney moving back towards a more traditional conservative worldview. Now, I'm glad that this article pointed this out. Let's read that part again. While Laurie's Christian beliefs are not depicted as being anti-trans, and Christian characters aren't incongruous with trans characters, of course, someone can be both religious and transgender. This is all very important, right? And I want us all to remember this because, as I've discussed on my channel before, there is no necessary contradiction between being Christian and being queer affirming. No necessary contradiction. The idea that there is such a necessary contradiction is part of a very specifically American and very specifically modern interpretation of Christianity that we call white Christian nationalism. Now, Christianity as a whole is 2,000 years old. It's very complicated. It's not unproblematic outside of this very narrow bubble of white Christian nationalism, obviously, but it is very diverse in its thinking and very nuanced and very expansive. And there are traditions of Christianity that are queer affirming that are much older than the white Christian nationalism that is currently dominating the discourse here in the United States. So whenever you hear someone telling you or implying in their own content that there's some kind of necessary contradiction between including a trans character and including a Christian character, that you can't do both, or that the inclusion of a trans character is somehow an offense to Christian morals, just remember that they are either lying or they don't understand their own religious tradition as well as they think they do. White Christian nationalism has spent the better part of 50 years now teaching millions of white children in American youth groups that a specifically American and specifically modern and specifically capitalist reading of the Bible is just what the Bible plainly says. It's not what the Bible plainly says. So if you come from that community, you have been sold a bill of goods about what it means to be a Christian and what it means to be trans and queer affirming, or being trans and queer, period. If you're somebody for whom being Christian is still important, but you also want to be queer and trans affirming, take heart in knowing that that's totally doable. There are many, many rooms in the great house of the Christian tradition. You do not have to restrict yourself to the basement, the dirty, dank, unkept, filthy basement of white Christian nationalism in order to keep being Christian. My rant is over. Let's continue with the article. The article continues. It's relevant to note that the last time Disney introduced an overtly Christian character was almost 2 decades ago in the 2007 film Bridge to Terabithia, which made numerous positive references to Jesus Christ and the church. In the years since then, Disney has made somewhat of an effort to increase LGBTQ plus representation across its output, from Ethan in Strange World to practically everyone in Agatha All Along, but it's not been without mixed results and major pushback from the community. Until very recently, Disney's LGBTQ plus representation was limited to fleeting moments or blink and you'll miss it glances. Then, films with LGBTQ plus representation, Strange World, Lightyear, were box office flops, which some felt was due to lacking promotion. Most recently, fans criticized the mass media producer for not explicitly making Riley queer in Inside Out 2, and then for pulling an episode of Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur from Disney Channel as it featured a trans character. And now the win or lose fiasco. So I should point out here that with the exception of Agatha All Along, I have not seen any of these shows or movies. I do remember the discourse around the Lightyear thing being in reference to like a 1 or 2 second scene of 2 moms kissing goodbye. It wasn't even like a romantic thing, really. And the fact that these were just fleeting glances, as this paragraph mentions, kind of tells me a lot about the cycle of fake outrage on YouTube, because a lot of the PAC-led channels made a lot of angry content about this, and it was like a blink and you'll miss it thing that a lot of people probably would not have even noticed had the outrage merchants not made content about it. So it's an old story. We'll have some concluding thoughts about that in a minute, but let's finish off this article. As the US descends into a post-diversity, equity, and inclusion era thanks to Donald Trump's administration, Disney lovers are concerned the company could be moving in a similar direction internally and externally. A memo shared with Reuters in February suggested that if it isn't explicitly banning, I think that means banning, DEI programs, it's certainly being more careful with how they're worded. A memo from Disney HR officer noted that the company's Reimagine Tomorrow site, a space for amplifying underrepresented voices, and which listed its DEI commitments, has been rebranded as My Disney Today, with the focus being pushed onto how the media conglomerate attracts the best staff who, quote, reflect the consumers we serve, unquote, and how the company supports underserved communities. It's another chapter in Disney's potted history with LGBTQ plus folk, and the community will be watching very closely to see how it unfolds. Okay, so this seems like kind of a nothing burger to me, right? I understand why Disney would want to promote the fact that they are including a Christian character in their content, right? Because they want to promote diversity, and diversity includes everyone, not just marginalized people. It focuses on marginalized people, but there's a place for everyone. So having a show where there was a Christian character and a trans character interacting in a non-hostile, loving team spirit kind of way seems like pretty wholesome content to me. It was kind of shady and kind of cowardly, frankly, of Disney to cut out the dialogue about the character of Kai being trans. I hope they will do better in the future. The only thing I want to part with is to note that the channels who made content about this, the Nerdrotic, Geeks and Gamers, the usual suspects, the project behind all of that has always been to launder white Christian nationalist talking points for an audience, primarily of young white men who do not consider themselves religious. The entire goal here was to convince those people that white Christian nationalist talking points is just apolitical common sense. And there was recently a little dust up on that end of the fan space called Goonergate, where some of the right wing video game content creators had a little bit of a schism, because it turns out that some of them have been knowing and conscious Christian nationalists the entire time, and they just took their masks off after Donald Trump got reelected to his second term as president. And it turns out that those particular content creators are against all expressions of sexuality in video games, not just queer ones. So the other group of right-wing video game content creators who got mad about this and like wanted to kick the explicitly Christian nationalist ones out of their community don't seem to realize that the fact that they agree with those white Christian nationalist content creators on all of their talking points except the religious ones is not a good sign. It just means they have been successfully propagandized, as I suspect many of you have. So going forward, whenever you see content from Nerdrotic, The Critical Drinker, Geeks and Gamers, RK Outpost, the rest of their orbiters, just remember that you are being sold white Christian nationalism, even if the content creator themselves doesn't know what they're doing, because a lot of these content creators are just useful idiots. So if you like this content, please do all the usual things and make all the usual offerings to the great God algorithm. Give me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, share the video, comment down below, and until next time, remember that what's best in life is to crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and engage in discourse with the women. Thanks for watching.